everyone. Welcome to the Azure and AI Show. My name's Dan Ray, and I am joined by one of our regular hosts and a special guest today. Solomon, welcome.
Hi, hello, welcome everyone.
How are things over in the UK?
Awesome. It's been great, and yeah, a lot of work also. Yeah,
Excellent. Is it rainy
yeah.
over there, or what's the weather like?
The weather has been warm because
Okay.
it was about 9 degrees yesterday, and I think today also. So the weather has been okay. Yeah, nice
Good.
weather. Yeah. And thanks everyone for joining us live today. And yeah, we have a lot to present, and also we have Matt here for the first time.
Nice to be here. Thanks for having me. This is really exciting.
Yeah, and congratulations on your recent MVP, Matt.
Yeah, thank you. It's a lot of fun, and actually, the project I'm talking about today is probably a decent part of why I got that or how I got that.
Congratulations.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, I appreciate you filling out the sessionize. I think it's 3 or 4 submissions for sessions. And since we're a weekly show, the goal would be to start, scheduling those into the future. So I think you're our first scheduled guest.
And
You'll
yet, you
have
still didn't accept my my submission, so you just scheduled me.
I am getting used to that side of sessionize.
It's a wonderful tool. I love it.
Yeah, I've used it as a submitter, but this is the first time that we have, and I think I've got the team correctly set up to review submissions. But Matt, off this session, I should ping you and make sure that I'm doing things right in the sessionize side of things. Do you schedule that or hold submissions for any other types of events?
So I co-organize the Central Ohio.net developer group, but we don't use Sessionize for that. It's
Okay.
more of a social thing. But I use Sessionize as a session reviewer for various conferences around Ohio, particularly, but also for all the things that I'm submitting to. So it's really handy to say, like, who's going to reject me or accept me still, and what do I have going on? Because it can be chaos at times.
Yeah, I would agree. And I apologize. That's on.
Oh, you're all
me
good.
for that.
I have a sense of humor that's a little interesting.
So our first presenter is Matt. And Matt, can I share your screen now? And
Yeah,
I'll
sure.
turn
Go
off
for
the
it.
background music here so we can get started.
All right. Would you like me to just kick it off here?
Yeah, if you don't mind, that'd be
Sure.
perfect.
No worries at all. So hello, I'm Matt Eland. I'm a software engineering instructor in Columbus, Ohio. And oddly enough, a large part of my professional reputation is somehow tied to the movie Die Hard. Uh, I'm a Microsoft MVP in artificial intelligence. And let me explain to you kind of how I got to here. So a couple years ago, my wife and I were hanging around on the couch watching TV, and I was cruising Reddit as I do, and I came across a meme about Die Hard and it being a Christmas movie. And I realized I'd known her for 10 years, and I hadn't asked her what she thought. So I said, "Hey, honey, do you think Die Hard's a Christmas movie?" And she's like, "Why would it be a Christmas movie?" I'm like, "Well, okay, all right." So there's this theory that Die Hard should be considered a Christmas movie because it takes place on Christmas Eve at a Christmas party. It has not one, not two, but 3 classic Christmas songs. And at its core, the story is all about reconciling a relationship between a husband and a wife. Now, there are some, terrorists slash robbers. Sorry, spoilers. Who complicate that storyline, but it's really about reconciling their relationship. And she looks at me and she's like, "Okay, all right." However, it was released in July. There are over 50 F-bombs. It has a kill count of 23. And what is even wrong with you? So we had a laugh, and ordinarily we just kind of move on to the next thing and just carry on with our lives. Except the night before, I had taken and passed the Azure AI Fundamentals Certification Exam, which is absolutely fantastic certification exam. It takes about a week to study for, and it is phenomenal. It teaches you about ethics in AI, Azure Cognitive Services, Azure Machine Learning. I love this. And I was itching for an excuse to try machine learning in a more serious context. And what I thought was, hold on a second. This is a classification problem. With supervised learning, we have regression tasks and we have classification tasks. Regression tasks are all about predicting a numerical value, such as maybe the price a car is going to sell for. And classification tasks are all about predicting a category. Is something going to default or not default? Or in this case, is it going to be a Christmas movie or a non-Christmas movie? And I thought, wait a minute, I can do this. I can take a bunch of data and I can feed it into Azure Machine Learning Studio, and it can fit a model to that data to memorize the trends inherent in this data. And with that trained model, I can then throw new features at it, and it's going to internalize what it's learned before and be able to generate a prediction for the column that it's trying to predict. In this case, I could give it all sorts of information about a movie it's never seen before, and it would predict whether that movie should be considered a Christmas movie or a non-Christmas movie based on what it's observed about historical Christmas movies and non-Christmas movies. Now, I'm currently a master's student studying data analytics, and I'm deep into data science now. But at the time, I was a baby data scientist. I didn't know too much. Okay? And there's something that's part of Azure that I love, and it's automated machine learning. And what it is it's saying, hey, you don't have to be a deep data scientist. You don't have to know all of the various algorithms and what the hyperparameters for those algorithms mean. You just have to tell us what you want to do. And we're going to basically take a data science shotgun, and we're going to try all the different models, all the different algorithms that might work, and try various different hyperparameters for those things. And we're going to tell you what performs the best. So for me, this was fantastic because it lowered the learning curve for data science, and it let me get in and focus on the data and the task I was trying to accomplish. But even if you're an experienced data scientist, they can save you a lot of time and also help you see things that you might not have considered. Like, oh, I didn't even think of trying that particular algorithm. Oh, that makes a lot of sense. And so I came up with this idea. My idea was I was going to gather together a training data set, a list of movies, and whether or not those movies should be considered a Christmas movie. That'd be the label column I'm trying to predict. Then I was going to feed those to Azure Machine Learning Studio and its automated machine learning, and have it sort of internalize the relationship between all the various features, such as the genre, the release date, the actors, things like that, and the labels it ultimately predicted. And once it memorized all those movies that didn't include Die Hard, then I was going to say, hey, with this trained model, what do you think about Die Hard? If I give you Die Hard, what do you think? Is this a Christmas movie? Is this not a Christmas movie? So that was really my plan. Now, I had to avoid bias because I was incredibly biased. I thought Die Hard was a Christmas movie. My wife was biased as well. She thought it wasn't. And so I decided, okay, the training data should not include Die Hard, and it should be as impartial as possible. So I went out to gather a data set that would work. I decided I needed two things. I needed a movies data set and a list of known Christmas movies. And I would combine the two of those together through data wrangling to give me a final comma-separated value file that I could upload to Azure and use that to train my model. Now, there's a lot of different places you can go out there and get data sets. Azure has some great ones built in, but I found the data set I was looking for at Kaggle.com, which is a fantastic data science community. And they had this movies data set that had all sorts of information about movies, who was in them, the various keywords that are part of them, the overviews, and it looked to be a really rich data set. So I decided to work with this. But this didn't have a column for, is this a Christmas movie or is this not a Christmas movie? And so I said, how do I determine what is and isn't a Christmas movie in a fair and unbiased way? And I decided to go with popular opinion. I decided to do a search out there on Bing and just say, hey, give me a list of Christmas movies. And I took the top 5 results. And I decided that if something was listed on 2 or more of these 5 lists, that I was going to consider a Christmas movie for training purposes. And that came up with this list of Christmas movies here that, they had some things that were pretty universally agreed as a Christmas movie, such as, Home Alone, Elf, White Christmas, all these things were fairly universally agreed to. But then you had some other things such as Christmas Evil that only appeared in a couple. Now, interestingly, Die Hard showed up on 4 out of 5 of those lists. And the 5th list said, sorry, John McClane, we don't consider you a Christmas movie. So all 5 of those lists considered Die Hard to be a Christmas movie. So if I was just going off this process, we'd say, okay, yeah, Die Hard should be considered a Christmas movie. But we weren't. We were trying to see what machine learning would think of it. So with this list of movies and the movies data set, I then went through and I did my data wrangling. I opened up a Jupyter notebook in Visual Studio Code, and I wrote some Python code to really start to understand the trends in this data, see where the data looked to be corrupt. For example, the budget and expenses and revenue columns were pretty unreliable, and I had to remove them. We had some pieces of data in that data set that were like an entire season of Major League Baseball was in there for some reason. I had to prune those things out. My goal was to compare box office movies to box office Christmas movies. That was my goal. Didn't want to compare anything foreign language, anything that flopped, anything like that. Just your popular movies versus your popular Christmas movies. And most critically, I removed Die Hard from the resulting data set so that Azure Machine Learning wouldn't know that Die Hard was a Christmas movie or was not a Christmas movie. It needed to be able to have its trained model and then make the predictions off it without having any sort of bias. So this gave me my file, and then I was able to go into Azure Machine Learning Studio. I was able to say, hey, I want to run my experiment. Now, when you do this, you say, hey, what kind of task are you trying to do? In my case, I'm trying to do a classification task. Okay, what are you trying to predict? Well, I'm trying to predict whether or not it's a Christmas movie. You can choose to enable or disable deep learning. I'm going to talk more about that later on. And you can configure how much of the data it holds back to check to see how accurate it was. This is the test training split. Usually that's about 10 to 30%, depending on what you're doing. You can do more advanced things, such as providing your own custom set or K-fold validation, things like that. But you also are going to provide some evaluation criteria, such as, hey, what's the maximum amount of time you can train? Can you stop early if you think you've got a solution? That kind of thing. And then you hit go. And what it does is it runs on Azure's compute instances or compute clusters, and it runs all these different models, all these different algorithms to say, hey, how does this perform? How does this perform? How does this perform? What's the best thing I could find? And it tries about, I think it's like 47 different things. And it said, hey, I think the best performing one is this particular one based on the evaluation metrics you gave me to look at. Now, you can use all sorts of sizes and scales of CPUs or GPUs on Azure, and you're really paying by the hour, and it's like cents an hour. It's pretty phenomenal. There's also some other ways of making your cost cheaper. I actually just wrote an article last week about maximizing your Azure machine learning spend, which is pretty fun. So check that out on accessibleai.dev for some other articles and content from me. I'll link to that at the end here too. But it's going to tell you what it thinks is the best model. And you're going to be able to look at all the different models it came up with. And you're going to have all these detailed metrics associated with them, including some very scary charts for a baby data scientist. So I was looking at this, and I'm like, oh my goodness. And there's like all these pages of metrics that I'd never seen before. And for me, this was amazing because it gave me all these things to Google and learn and understand that I hadn't encountered before. And Azure Machine Learning basically gave me this jetpack to get deeper and deeper into data science and learn what all this stuff means. The most relevant thing for me was this confusion matrix in the lower right. These are really, really helpful when you're doing a classification task because it's going to tell you, in this case, this is binary classification. It either is a Christmas movie or it's not. And so it's telling me, hey, you predicted it was a Christmas movie when it actually was. So yay, that's great. And often when it wasn't a Christmas movie, you predicted it wasn't. But sometimes you said it was when it actually wasn't, and sometimes you said it wasn't when it actually was. So a confusion matrix helps you understand what mistakes your model is making and its various characteristics. That helps you understand if it's a good model or a bad model, because depending on what you're trying to do, some of these boxes might be better than others. So I trained a model and I evaluated it, and the model had a pretty high accuracy, but when I looked deeper, all it was doing was always predicting a movie was a non-Christmas movie. I'm like, okay, what's going on here? And I ran into my first problem, a class imbalance. I had 50,000 movies, and only like 50 of them were Christmas movies. And so it said, hey, the best thing for me to do is just always predict no, because so few of my movies were actually Christmas movies. And so with this class imbalance, there's two approaches to this. You could either use something like SMOTE and upsample your Christmas movies to kind of keep pace with the non-Christmas movies, or you could do what I did and you can downsample. You can discard at random your non-Christmas movies. So I had a 1-to-5 ratio. So 4 out of 5 were non-Christmas movies, but you had 1 out of 5 that was. And with that level of ratio, it was enough of Christmas movies that the training process was able to get a little bit more context. So that moved it up to, a fairly reliable model, but it wasn't reliable enough. I didn't feel like I could trust its metrics enough. And so I was getting frustrated, but then I took a step back and I said, wait a minute. Looking at a row like this, can I tell if this is a Christmas movie or a non-Christmas movie as a human? And I realized I didn't have enough information to know. I realized I wasn't giving my training process enough context. I'm like, okay, I can't just give it the genres and things like that. I need to give it more data. What data do I have to give it? And I found that the data set that I was using also had a collection of keywords. And the keywords are just random tagged things the community has added, but it was enough for me to see kind of the characteristic of the movie. So I'm going to show you a couple examples of that. So here is a movie that has the tags of holiday, burglar, home invasion, mischief, booby trap, suburban Chicago, mischievous child, Christmas, and child. Now, if you like your movies, you probably can recognize that this is Home Alone, Christmas classic, and very good movie all around. Here's another one. Exotic Island, DNA, Paleontology, Tyrannosaurus Rex, Triceratops, Brontosaurus, Electric Fence Island, Dinosaur, Amusement Park, and Theme Park. This would be, of course, the wonderful Jurassic Park movie, which it's really unfortunate they never made any sequels to that. But this gave me enough context as a human to be able to understand that this was a Christmas movie or non-Christmas movie. And just for reference, this is kind of the tags we have associated with Die Hard. So there's a number of things around the action stuff. There's also some things around Christmas Party and Noel and things like that. So I thought, okay, this has a shot of working. And so what I did is I added like a column per keyword that might be present, and I put either a 1 or a 0 there. And I said, this should fix it, right? And no, it didn't. It could have, but it didn't. What I bumped into was a new thing I had to Google, and it's something called the curse of dimensionality. There were so many columns now that the model training process took forever to try to analyze them, and it didn't have enough information to kind of infer the relationships. And so I had encountered this curse of dimensionality. I needed to take my keyword information and not have a new column per keyword I could have, but instead I took it and I put it all into one column, and I made it like a comma-separated value column. And Azure wasn't able to do anything with that until I enabled deep learning. Once I turned on deep learning, it was able to use these deep and complex neural networks to sort of gain insight from the structure of the text. And that gave me a model that had a performance or an accuracy of 96.875%. I've done this experiment a number of times now, and it tends to get around the same level. The algorithm it chooses differs each time I do it, but the metrics generally tend to be pretty good. And I looked at the model, and the metrics were all, pretty high for the numbers you'd want to be high, and low for the numbers you'd want to be low. And most critically, the confusion matrix, it had some issues sometimes where it said a movie was not a Christmas movie when in fact it was, but it never got it wrong. If it said yes, you could trust it, right? And so I said, okay, this is now good enough. I can use this potentially to generate my prediction. But first, let's understand a little bit more about how it actually works. And so I use something called aggregate feature importance, which is baked right in there in the Azure Machine Learning Studio portal. And I was able to say, hey, what's important to this model? What are the top 5 features? It says, hey, the most important thing to me by far is the keywords column, and then the overview column, and then a couple other things that are slightly relevant but not really relevant. To me, this looks like it made sense. Now, if it had said the most important thing was whether or not the movie was a horror movie, I might have had some concerns about the accuracy of my model. But this is pretty cool. And you could go even deeper and say, okay, keywords are important, but show me how they work. And so you can look at the individual feature importance. And so here's a case where it said, hey, if something has the keywords of Santa Claus, nerd, faith, gift, bell, beard, North Pole, shoot, trestle, ticket, or Christmas, it's very likely to be a Christmas movie, 99% likely. Okay? So I said, okay, this model looks like it makes sense. Let's test it out. And so I went into Azure Machine Learning Studio, and I went into the model, and I deployed it as a real-time endpoint. This actually spins up an Azure Container Instance or Azure Kubernetes service, because you can't give a talk without talking about Kubernetes. It's like a law. But I spun up an Azure Container Instance, and I was now able to make REST calls to it. I gave it the JSON for Die Hard. Remember, it had no knowledge of Die Hard before, so I'm giving it all this information about what the Die Hard movie is, and I was doing a post to that endpoint, and it's going to generate back either a 1 or a 0 based on what it's predicting for the label. Again, the label's the thing we're trying to predict. In this case, it's trying to predict, is it a Christmas movie? So I hit test, and I held my breath, and I got back a 1. In other words, yes, Virginia, Die Hard is absolutely a Christmas movie. So yippee-ki-yay, that's amazing. But then I said, wait a minute. There's this other method over here. It's called predict proba, which gives me the probability. And I plugged that in, and I said, what's the probability of it being a Christmas movie? And it plugged in 95.785%. In other words, if I was doing a standard p-test, this would have rejected the null hypothesis that Die Hard is not a Christmas movie in a fairly scientific fashion. So I was like, yeah, that's awesome. And then I said, okay, well, what do I have to do to make Die Hard not a Christmas movie? And I found that if I removed the keyword of Christmas party and Christmas Eve, it thought Die Hard was not a Christmas movie. But that's not Die Hard, right? That's like a completely different movie. So Die Hard is absolutely a Christmas movie, and I was very thankful I got that result. So the number one question I get on this talk when I give this at conferences is, what about my wife? What did she say when I told her about this? I said, oh, hey, honey, I finished the experiment I've been doing all weekend. I got a response from Azure, found out it was a Christmas movie. She's like, oh, well, what did it say? I was like, oh, it sounded it is a Christmas movie. And she's like, oh, okay. What do you want to do about dinner? So that's about the level of our disagreements that we have. She's wonderful. But what she could have asked me was, Matt, what's our Azure bill going to be this month? And my answer to that was actually pretty good, right? The real costs that we have for Azure are mostly around deploying it as an endpoint and long-term storage of this stuff, right? It's like, so you pay very little for the training process unless you're using like the really beefy GPUs and stuff like that. And even then you can say, hey, use the low priority mode where I can be interrupted and stuff like that. So I really do recommend this stuff. This is a lot of fun, and you can do a lot of good stuff and learn a lot of stuff with it. So welcome to the party, pal. Die Hard is absolutely a Christmas movie. If you don't believe me, that's fine. Go do this experiment yourself. Kaggle has the data set, or others if you want to use something else. Azure has a Netflix data set. Automated machine learning is very cheap to get into. But also, you're wrong. It absolutely is a Christmas movie. So, you can kind of deal with that. Now, however, if you don't believe me, you might want to take the screenwriter's word for it. So Steven D'Souza is the screenwriter for Die Hard, and he compared Die Hard to White Christmas, and I love this comparison. He said that more of Die Hard occurs around Christmas than White Christmas does. Die Hard has more Christmas music than White Christmas does. While the villain for White Christmas might have been a little nastier than Die Hard, the kill count was also far, far, far higher for White Christmas, given that it took place during the Battle of the Bulge. So if you want to learn more about Azure Machine Learning or this project or other things I've been working on, because mine tend to be pretty nerdy, you can check out my AI writing at accessibleai.dev. I do a lot of writing there. I also do a lot of YouTube content at mattondatascience.com that redirects you to my YouTube channel. This show is a great resource as well. But I also really have to plug the AI Fundamentals certification. This takes you about a week. It costs fairly affordable rate, and you can even find ways of making it cheaper sometimes. But this is going to give you a good understanding of what you can do with AI on Azure, as well as talking about a lot of the ethical aspects of AI, which is really, really, really important. Just be aware that if you get into this certification, you may find yourself spending Halloween weekend, predicting whether or not Die Hard is a Christmas movie. So, thanks for having me, guys. I appreciate this. Enjoy this.
That was awesome. Just the right amount of humor, and wasn't the quote from the movie that he wrote on the sweatshirt? Now I have a machine gun. Ho
Yep.
ho ho.
Ho ho ho! Now I have a machine gun. Yep.
Yeah.
It should be on Christmas cards.
Vice versa.
Yep.
Yeah, that stuck out in my
nice
mind. Christmas in Hollis was featured in that movie, which my wife doesn't consider that a Christmas song because it's rap, and she hates rap. So
yeah.
She doesn't let me play my Christmas rap album. Have you ever seen that, Matt?
No.
So it came out around the time that Christmas in Hollis came out, and it's got all sorts of other rappers that aren't as well known as Run DMC, but it's a whole album featuring songs, raps that are Christmas themed. So there's a ghetto Santa and all sorts of other like 80s, 90s rappers doing something. Derek B from the UK does, oh, what's his called? His is probably my favorite because it's more of like a jazz beat. Yeah. I'll have to look it up. I'll send it to you.
That'd be great. Thank you.
Thiago, welcome. Thanks for tuning in. We've had a lot of people, Matt, making comments here. Craig Kennedy, somebody I know from the Chicagoland area, is interested in AI search. Excellent,
cool.
Craig.
I grew up over there. That's cool.
Cool. Excellent.
Yeah. Keep an eye on the Azure Cloud Skills challenges that pop up periodically because they'll often feature the AI certifications, and AI 900 in particular is great, and it never expires too, which is nice.
Yes.
The fundamentals, they don't expire.
So, Pete, I saw your question there about Bruce Willis's account. Now, Bruce Willis famously said that Die Hard is not a Christmas movie; it's a Bruce Willis movie, and I respond to that by saying, like, hey, that's sort of like he's saying. I'm asking someone, is it going to rain tomorrow? And they say, irrelevant. Tomorrow is Saturday. It's like, it doesn't make any sense. Like, it has no relevance on the fact. I used to have slides to that effect, but I took those out at a good pace, just given everything he's struggling with.
Yeah, I don't know if I was trying to think of other movies Bruce Willis was in to see if there were other Christmas movies, because sometimes you associate the actor with a particular genre, like, obviously action. But can't think of anything offhand.
No, I think he was Fifth Element.
Ferrell, yeah. Before Elf, I don't know if I'd associate Will Ferrell with Christmas either. So, I don't know if that's a fair thing to think about. Thanks for joining us. You're welcome to stick around.
Probably will.
Yeah, typically we do at least some of the show as just discussion. Solomon, I know you wanted to speak about conditional access. Do you want to?
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
Sure.
Okay, I would just share my screen. I think I'll be using the Microsoft website.
Okay.
Let me just share my screen real quick. Okay, so today I just want to speak about conditional access. And yeah, we know that when we are talking about security, right? When it comes to identity is now a primary security perimeter. If we need to secure our data, the identity of users in our organization, we also need to secure our identities. And in terms of identity, there are a lot of ways you can actually secure your identity. And one of those ways of protecting your identity is the conditional access, right? And when we're talking about conditional access, I always tell people, most times I don't really, I just, the name on its own is like a very big explanation. When we talk about conditional access, that means you need to meet some conditions before you can access something. So the name is already explaining what it's actually doing. So conditional access. And conditional access, once we're talking of condition on its own, condition simply means if then statement. If this happens, then this should happen. If you're going out, please get me a drink. So if you're not going out, then you're probably not going to get me a drink. You'll just be at home. So it's the same way it applies to when we are talking about conditional access. But when we are talking of conditional access, there are some prerequisites we need to know in the Azure Active Directory. We would need to get the P1 license for us to be able to set up conditional access. And also, we need to be a global admin or a conditional access administrator for us to do exactly what I will be demoing today. So I will do a short demo and I'll just try to explain some stuffs around what I'll be doing. So if we go further to look at conditional access, we'll see that the way conditional access works in Active Directory, it gets signals, and when it gets these signals, it uses those signals to take decision, and then it can enforce those decisions that have been taken, right? And before these signals would happen, right, there's need for authentication. So what it simply means, if you do not authenticate, the signals won't work, right? If you probably type in the wrong password to an account, then the policies would not apply to that account. But for these signals and for the policy to be triggered, you would first of all make sure that you're authenticating with the right information. And once that is done, then those signals, they would now start carrying out the decision process will start applying. So if you look at the way the signals that comes in, the signals they come from, the signals are gotten from the users and location. So when we are setting up the conditional access, we can set it up based on the users or the location of the users, and this also includes the IP location of the users. We could choose to say if this particular user is trying to access a particular application in our tenant, then this should happen, right? We can choose to say if this user has a risky sign-in or is a risky user, then this conditional access should take effect, right? So we can get the signals from users and location. We can as well get these signals from application. If they are trying to access a particular application, then we can get the signal. We can also get the signals from devices, and all of these happen in real time, right? As the signals are being sent, they are happening in real time. So once we get the signals, the next thing that we can move on to is, what do we do? Are we going to allow this person access? Are we going to prompt them for MFA, or are we going to block them? So if, for example, I don't want people from a particular region, or probably I have employees and I say, I'm employing you in this region, you can't work in this region, right? I can choose to set a conditional access that if this user is accessing any resources or any application in my tenant from outside this location, then block access. So at this point, we can choose to also say, okay, we don't want it to be very strict. We can say you can sign in, but then we just need more security, right? So what you have to do, you have to provide another layer of security, which is the MFA. And once these conditions are met, then we can then gain access to the data, or we are blocked from accessing those data. So if I come here to the portal, right, this is M365 portal where we have the Entra admin. You can see the conditional access. We can also see it in the Active Directory. We're using the Active Directory from Azure. So if we come here, we can see we have policies right here. And if you look at these policies, we have templates, right? We also have upload policy files, and then we have what if. So when we look at this, one thing I actually like that I've been using in conditional access is what if, because with what if, I can actually troubleshoot. I can also test what I have, the policies that I've created. So I would try to go through the policy, then I would also come to what if. So with policies, we have the templates, and with the templates, we can pick from any of these templates, and you can see they are categorized into tabs. We have the zero trust, where you can set up policies for the multi-factor authentications, and these are for admins. We also have the remote work and all of that, but I would be going to new policies, so I could just explain some of the tabs that are there. So if we look at the policies, right, when we come to the policy page here where we have the name, we can choose any name that would best describe our policy that we want to create. And once we choose this name, probably I say, okay, I want to block anybody that is having the Teams admin role on their account. I want to prompt them to use MFA, right? I could as well just say, okay, MFA policy for Teams admin. Okay, so I'm just trying to show the name, right? I could actually give it a name that is something another person in probably IT department would read and get like a knowledge of what is happening there before they start going in to look at it. So under the assignments, we have users. So in users, at this point, you can see it is none. So for users, we can choose to select all users in our organization. And anytime you select all users, you will always get that warning, do not lock yourself out, because it simply means you might set a conditional access and it will affect you as the global admin. And by the time you're having issues, right, with the conditional access, nobody's going to log in to change that, because you that is the global admin or probably the conditional access administrator, you're all locked out of your tenant. So that's why we have this warning here. But then we can as well say we want to select some group of users that we want. And if you look at this, in where we have select users and group, you will see we have guest or external users. So what this does, we can set this MFA for guests in our tenant and external users. So guests are simply those users that we probably invite to our tenants using the B2B collaboration, or external users that are we created access for using the B2B direct and all of that. We can actually use this to control how they gain access to resources in our tenant. Then we also have directory roles. So what this does is I can actually select the role that I want to set this policy on. So like I said, Teams administrator, you can say I can actually select the Teams administrator for this particular policy I want to create. And then we have users and group. Now we can select some users that will want these policies to be, the policy we are creating to be applied on. And we can as well select a group that we want to apply this policy on if we want to. And something else that we should note in this tab is, what if after we selected this, we want to exempt some set of people from these policies? So we have the exclude. So the exclude, we can exclude guests, like I said earlier. We can choose to exclude a particular role. Probably we want to select all the roles, but we want to exclude some roles. We can also choose to exclude some set of users. Probably we say, okay, this is our breakout account, or we don't want anything that has to do with policies to affect this particular account. We can choose to always exclude the account. So that's where we have the exclude. And if we move to the next part, so the next part, basically what is happening here, we are actually selecting the apps that we want these policies to be applied on. So we can choose to select all apps in our tenants if we want to. We can as well choose to select apps based on filters, and we can just select maybe a particular app that we want to apply this to, right? And if we come here, we have the same thing, right? Exclude, where we can exclude some apps based on the filters, and also we can select a particular app that we don't want this policy to be applied on. And looking at this also, we have user actions, right? We can choose to prompt MFA anytime a user is trying to register security information. Once the user wants to do that, we can prompt MFA. And when they are trying to also join a device, we can choose to also prompt MFA. It might not even be prompting the MFA. I'm using prompt MFA. We can choose to probably block access, right? Because we've not yet gotten to the access control, right? So we would just choose the conditions, and then when we get to the access control, that would determine what will happen based on the conditions that we've set. So I will just go back. So for this one, authentication is more about our apps registration in terms of when we are trying to secure our apps, right? So that's when we use this authentication context. So I will just leave this on all apps for this particular demo, right? So we have conditions here. So for conditions here, we have user risks. So basically what user risks is all about is just like AI that we heard about, right? So I think AI is also playing a factor here in terms of their probabilities that a particular user is at risk in terms of probably their password has been leaked, or probably they've used a website that has been compromised and all of that. So when we get these feeds in Microsoft that, okay, this user risk is high, we can choose to carry out actions, right? And when we are talking about user risk, the actions that we can carry out, we can choose to prompt the user that, okay, since we see that there is a high risk on your account, you have to reset your password. And then we have the sign-in risk, right? What the sign-in risk does is, if we notice that there's a sign-in risk, and what sign-in risk simply means is, if a user is signing, but then we don't trust the sign-in process, that the person that signed in is not actually who we think has that account. So that's the user risk. So the way to deal with user risks is we can choose to say, okay, if we detect a user risk, because when you're configuring this, you have options to select. If we see that the user risk is high, we can select that. Also, we also have the option for signing risks. We can choose to select if it is high also, we would get the signal. And for signing risks, what we would do in terms of granting access, we'll tell the person, since we don't trust who is signing in with this account, you will have to use MFA. That means you have to provide another layer of authentication. So that's for the signing risks. So we also have the device here. We can choose to configure it for different devices, and here we have a lot of devices, and we can choose to also exclude the device we don't want this to get signals from. So if we also move to location, so for location, we can choose to select a location. Like I said earlier, if probably I don't want a user to sign in from a particular location when they are using my cloud apps, I can actually choose to select the location and block it. But for location, before you choose location, you have to create those, you have to add those locations. So from the conditional access page, there is where we have named location. So what you do there, you can add different locations so that when you want to set this access control for for locations, you can easily pick any of the locations you want, right? So if I go to select location here, I already have like 3 locations that I created earlier. So you can choose to select locations if you want to select a location. So I would just I'm just going to leave that. And then we have client app. Basically, what client app does is, we have the modern authentication, and then we have the basic authentications. There are some client apps that still supports the basic authentication, which is not secured, right? So what um what this does, right? We can choose to block users that are using the basic authentication, and then we can choose to also give access to users that are using the basic authentications, right? Based on our design, right? So that's basically what these have to do. It just have to do with the authentication method and how they are going to be accessing resource in your tenant. So here we have the device. So for this place, we can choose to filter device based on the product number, based on the manufacturer. We can choose to say, oh, if we can add all these properties, right? You can see if we probably have Intune in our organization, and we have namings for devices, right? We can use that to narrow down on what our conditions would look like. So you can see, we can say manufacturer, and then if we select manufacturer, we can choose to say equals to, and if I choose to say HP and all of that, I can also add more expressions in terms of device filter. So I'm not going to do that. So let me just close this, right? So we also have the access control. So here is, at this point here, so at this point here, we can choose to say, okay, are we going to block this user if the user is a Teams administrator? Because I selected Teams administrator. Are we going to block this user if probably he's logging in from this particular location? I don't know the condition I selected here. So, okay, location. So let me just turn this off. So I can actually use the location of the user to say, oh, if this user is from this particular location, what exactly should be triggered in my tenant, or what signals would the conditional access gets to trigger any of this. And if you look at this, we have block access. So block access simply means they would not gain access to any of those stuff. So we can grant access. So when we are granting access, we can choose to say, okay, now that we are granting you access, you need to provide multi-factor authentication. So if you also notice, when I was talking about user risks, so for user risks now, you can see we have required password change. So we can choose to say if a user has a user risk that is medium or high, then prompt the user to change their password. So we would grant them access, but then we'll have to tell them you have to change your password because we are detecting that the user risk for your account is high. But when we have sign-in risks, we'll prompt the user, you have to use MFA. We know you probably sign in, but we don't trust who is signing in because of the level is showing high, right? So you have to authenticate with MFA for you to gain access. So if they don't do any of this, automatically they won't be able to gain access because that's what the condition is all about. So this is just more like if you want to use all the controls or you do not want to probably use that. So once you click on that, so session, basically what session does is just about cookies and tokens, right, in our that the Azure AD is sending to the device. So that's basically what happens in session. So for this, this is basically just we can choose to block a user when they're using a particular app. We don't want them to download. We can add custom policies. We can use monitor only, which is in preview. So this place, they have like new stuffs, right? This preview is just like a new feature. And then we also have frequency. For frequency, we can choose to set frequency every 30 minutes, every 1 hour, depending on the frequency, right? So for this browser, right, this from this definition, you see that it's just more about once you close your browser, do we want you, when you open your browser, we need to still if you close your browser and open your browser, should we allow this person to continue using the previous session, or he needs to authenticate again? So that's just basically what that does. And this continuous access is more about tokens. When attackers, they use tokens, right, from a particular device, and they keep using that token for the session period until it expires. So for this continuous access evaluation, it just helps prevent that, and it makes sure that if a particular token is assigned to a device, it has to be used on that token. And for this resilience default disabled, it just simply means if there's an outage, should we continue using the previous token that has been sent this previous session until it expires, or we should end at that point? So that's what this does. And then this is this one cannot be turned on because of I did not select the apps right? So what I would do now, I would just close this and I will just save this. So before I save this now, you just need to know, we have the report only. If I'm setting up this, right, what this is going to do is, if I want to test this policy, right, I could choose to put it on reports only, and then I can monitor how it is working during that phase of reports only. So that's exactly what I would do with reports only. And if I want to enforce this, if I want to turn on this policy, I can click on turn on, and then I can choose to turn it off. So if I put this on turn on, then I can create it. So this policy I just created, what it will probably do is, if I create a new user and I assign the Teams admin to that user, if the user tries to log in to access any cloud application on my tenant, the user will be prompted to provide MFA. But one thing with the conditional access policy is, if there is a conditional access policy working on a particular user, right? We have some organization where people are prompted for MFA and they say, oh, go in and disable the MFA. When they go to disable the MFA, they probably go through the normal multi-factor authenticator and they'll be like, this user is disabled, right? We can't see MFA turned on this user. So what if does for us, it can actually help us test our policy, see how it's going to work, and also see if that policy is going to apply on a particular user we are testing the policy on. So if I click on what if, so I actually use this what if to troubleshoot the required is required here. All these other fields are not required, but you can choose to fill them. But the user field, you must select a user. So if I select a user in this tenant, right, I could just click on select a user. So if I select a random user from this tenant, let me just select this user. And if I click on what if, it will show me the policy that would be applied on this user. So if I look at this user now, there's no policy that would be applied on this user, because you can see this one, if we say policy that would not be applied, you can see the policies that would not be applied. And this is the reasons why the policy would not be applied: because of the user group, the user and groups, policy not enable user and groups. So if I create a user now, or probably just go and assign a user the Teams admin role from M365. So what I want to do, I just want to quickly give a user, that's this user I just opened, I want to assign the Teams role from M365, although it's on my other screen. Let me just quickly assign Teams administrator to this user. So I just assigned the Teams admin to this user. So I'll just try that again and see if it will pick. So I would refresh this page, and so let me select that user again and see if the policy would. So now we can see that policy that will be applied on this user is the policy I just created. And if I put reason why it will not, so you can see this policy is not among the policy that will not be applied on this user. But if I click on this, now you can see this policy will be applied on the user. And what is the current control? It requires MFA authentication, right? And the state of this policy shows that it is turned on. So with this, I can test the policy. I can as well troubleshoot this user if probably the user is getting prompted for MFA and the user doesn't know why. So I could just come here and check exactly why the user is being prompted for MFA without going around looking for all of the policies. You know, most times some people just have to go in, look at each of the conditions to trace what is actually happening. So what if is just one good way you can test and also troubleshoot all of that. So I think for today, I would just stop at this point, and then I would hand over to you, Dan. Yeah.
Excellent. Before you stop sharing your screen, I want to see if StreamYard supports double screen sharing.
Okay.
I saw somebody on, yeah, it looks like we can only add one or the other. Somebody was on Restream today, and they had two screens shared at the same time, which I thought was...
Okay, I want to add my... Oh, I think it took yours off.
It's one or the other in StreamYard. So I don't know if it's a new feature in Restream or if it was there for a while, but I was on another community event.
I think what will happen is we can test this out because we can actually create custom layers. So for the layers that we have now, we can see that we have one screen share and then users. So we can see if probably we could add two screen shares and then users. Can you see the layers I'm talking of?
Yeah, the edit layout. Yeah, I'll try that afterwards and see if that works. They said that you can't share two screens from the same computer, but that you were able to share, you could share your screen and I could share mine, and I guess Matt could share his. So we'd have the ability to show like three sides of a Teams meeting, or you could show like the admin side of conditional access and I could show the user experience, that type of thing. It might
yeah, that's nice.
Or we could all jump on a Quake deathmatch or something, that would work too.
Exactly. There's a lot of use cases for being able to see multiple computers, and that is one thing that at least one competitor to Teams does for training purposes, but the complexity that it adds, I'm not sure how often it's needed, but I know one of the competitors to Teams allows multiple screen shares at the same time for students to be able to see. So thought I'd test that before we move on with a couple community announcements here. We do have three places that we are, and I just did this backwards here. Let's swap the two. That looks better.
It's me all the time. Yep.
That's, I think, why they added that swap to PowerPoint presenter mode, was for when it makes the incorrect decision for you, right? But we are in three spots for the Microsoft Speaker Club. We have a LinkedIn channel, we have a YouTube channel, which is fairly new, and we are on Twitter as a verified account. We don't have as many followers as I think any of our actual members. But we're also on Sessionize. And Matt, I think during your presentation, I did what I need to do from a speaker perspective to accept and communicate your acceptance to you. Let me know if anything there did not.
It's all jolly and working well. Thank you, Dan.
Awesome. That is a new piece for us. We've had Javier, Jayakumar, and Tushar. And then Nicholas, I think his submission was more about us being on his show. I'm not sure if it's an actual submission to be a guest on our show, or if it was more about soul into machines, navigating ethics and spirituality of AI. But we've had at least 4 people fill out profiles for us. And Matt, just so you're aware, I sent you a $250 digital download link for the Microsoft Company Store.
Oh, lovely. I got it already. Thank you very much.
No problem. As employees of Microsoft or alumni, we get 15 of these friends and family discount cards. When I started at Microsoft, I thought the $250 was somebody else's money. So I expensed it on my Amex card at Microsoft, and my boss said, "What are you doing?" And I said, "I'm spending some of my money." And he said, "Dan, it's your money. And I thought, well, why would I want to spend my money on Microsoft licenses when I work for Microsoft? And what you realize is that Microsoft licensing and even some of the accessories, hardware accessories, are usually about 50 to 75% off retail. So when I realized that, I thought, well, there's a reason that either I might be interested in this, or people that I know might be interested in it. I believe these only work for digital downloads, Matt, but if there's anything that you're looking for, hardware accessory, something else, let me know and I can assist you with that for certain. And then, Matt, I found your accessibleai.dev website. So I put that out in our chat, and we've had quite a few people that have tossed in comments today. Thank you very much for everybody that's been commenting. If you're interested in the Microsoft Designer preview, we do have codes, as many of us in the Microsoft Speaker Club were given early access to the Designer preview. So I believe most of my accounts that are in the preview have 6 to 10 invites left for early access. Next Thursday, I know we're planning to do Journey to the Cloud. That is now a monthly on the first Thursday. And I believe the time zone change is this weekend. Is that correct, Solomon, for the UK and Ireland?
I'm not sure. I'm not actually following that up, but I know it is going to change soon.
I think it's either this weekend or it might be next weekend, but there's a time zone change, which would mean for us in the US, it kind of puts it back to the normal time that I'm used to for these events. Matt, you mentioned the Cloud Skills Challenge. About, I want to say 15 MVPs have Cloud Skills challenges going throughout the month of March. And I have just over 100 people participating in my challenge. So if you haven't signed up for that, feel free to find through the Microsoft Speakers Club or my profile the link to the Cloud Skills Challenge. And Matt, have you come across the LinkedIn collaborative articles by any chance that use AI?
I don't believe I've seen those yet. No, that sounds interesting.
Yeah, so I just wrote a couple articles about this. So if I can find my article section or newsletter section, I went out and found where Microsoft put all of the different topics that are skills pages. And all of these different topics include AI driven collaborative articles. So if you have interest or focus in employee training, for instance, you can go to the employee training page. You can follow that as a skill. And then right at the top, you have a collaborative article that uses AI to try to predict, hey, you might have interest in contributing to this because you're already following employee training or these different signals that they get. So you have information about what these collaborative articles look like. And then in each of the articles, they'll have AI write a little bit about the topic. And then you have the ability to add your perspective.
That's cool.
Or review the perspectives of other people that have been either seeking these out or that have been suggested. So AI suggested 5 topics that I might have interest in, 3 of which were not really my focus area or things that I had or felt I had expertise in, but 2 of them were spot on. And I used those as a starting point and then thought, where could you find what these other lists are in case you haven't seen this feature? So I wrote a article starting with the beginning of Azure and Ray Ozzy's announcement of what was internally referred to as Red Dog. So in 2008, Ray Ozzy spoke at Tech Ready, which was the internal version of Tech Ed for Microsoft employees, and he announced Red Dog, and we were sworn to secrecy because it hadn't been released yet. In the fall of 2008, Ray Ozzy's announcement, and at the time, Windows Azure was publicly discussed in a Wired feature article, and he was on the front cover of the magazine. The thing that I found most interesting about that article was that Ray Ozzy hates speaking in public. And to this day, Ray Ozzy's presentation at Tech Ready is the best technical presentation I've ever seen. Matt, you're in the top 10. That was a really engaging presentation. But Ray Ozzy's use of Twistery, so a website that used to do love, hate, think, believe, feel, and wish, and introduce himself to thousands of Microsoft employees using this style in PowerPoint, I thought was really engaging. And then he also announced what became Windows Azure, now Microsoft Azure. I was elated to be in that audience in 2008 when this was still in early beta. So in that same article, towards the bottom, I put in all of the LinkedIn skills pages with collaborative articles. If anybody's interested in checking those out from an AI perspective, feel free to find this link. I'll put it in our show comments. And then Hermine has joined us as well. Welcome. Thanks for joining us.
I think she has the question for you.
What's that?
Yeah, that's the question.
Yeah. Can anybody with a premium subscription blog on LinkedIn?
I don't think you need it. Yeah.
Yeah. It's not a premium thing, Hermine. It is you have to be in creator mode. So you just switch your profile to creator mode, and then you have the ability to create one newsletter for yourself, and you can create a newsletter for like a company page. So if like the Detroit IT user group had a company page as well as I think you have a LinkedIn group now, the company page could have a newsletter for the Detroit IT user group. That's a great question.
We are starting to get streamception here with the visuals.
Yes, thank you. I was trying to, I'm looking at the window that I have the StreamYard stuff, and I wasn't aware that I was on the same page there, the Inception effect. And if you're not familiar with the Microsoft Speakers Club, this is a community that we have built around LinkedIn and Journey to the Cloud and the Azure and AI Show. And we have a newsletter, Journey to the Cloud News, for people that are interested in participating, where Sessionize, either because of our schedule, you're not free on a Friday afternoon in the US or the evening on a Friday in Europe, or I guess I'll call it America, and I'm not sure what the appropriate term is for our slice of the globe entirely, but it's more than the US. And then Europe and Asia, Australia. Sessionize is where we would be allowing people to schedule things for our shows. The Microsoft Speakers Club newsletter, Journey to the Cloud News, is your opportunity if those dates and times don't work for you, but you'd still like to participate. And with that, I hope everybody has either a great rest of your Friday or your Saturday morning, depending on where you are in the world. Thanks again, Matt. I put up Ralph's message, which I thought was very humorous.
I've been enjoying that myself, and happy to be here. This is a lot of fun.
Yeah. Thanks so much.
Thanks everyone for joining us today.
Yes. Solomon, have a great weekend. What's up for you?
I have an event tomorrow. That's what's up. Yeah.
I am playing around with Power BI and data visualization and that, and so that'll be a lot of fun.
Cool.
Yeah, nice.
I'm sure pickleball will be on my weekend list. And then Matt, have you heard of pickleball?
I have, yep.
Okay. Are you going to the MVP summit?
I'm not. I'll do it virtual this year.
Okay.
But my students are graduating that week, so yeah.
Yeah. My goal is, that's right. I think we talked about that.
Yeah.
My goal is to play out there. I played at a park by myself, just practicing, but I need to find 1 to 3 other people to play pickleball with properly in Redmond this April, I guess, next month. So that's part of my plan. And then I'm heading to the East Coast. I'm working with a food company next week to do some teams training. So
Great.
We'll be traveling next week. And I think I'm back by Friday, Solomon. So I'll touch base with Frank and see what our plan and if we have a guest for next week.
Okay. That would be great.
Excellent. Thanks, everyone.
Yeah. Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Bye-bye.